Good evening. Welcome to Talk Gnosis. Tonight we're going to be discussing the secret mark, and we are being joined by Dr. Tony Burke. Dr. Burke teaches biblical studies at the Department of Humanities, York University, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. He's also the editor and a contributor to the Ancient Gospel or Modern Forgery, the Secret Gospel of Mark in Debate, as well as the author and editor of The Secret Scriptures Revealed, a new introduction to the Christian Apocrypha. Welcome, Dr. Burke. How are you?
Welcome.
Hi. Good, thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Well, before we jump into this, Bishop Peterson, maybe you want to give a little short read or maybe a little short history of the Secret Gospel of Mark for our listeners and watchers who aren't really familiar with this text.
Sure. This is a very, very brief text or some excerpts that came from, supposedly from a letter written by Clement. And I'm going to just briefly read this material. It's very short, and it starts like this. And they come into Bethany, and a certain woman whose brother had died was there. And coming, she prostrated herself before Jesus and says to him, "Son of David, have mercy on me." But the disciples rebuked her. And Jesus, being angered, went off with her into the garden where the tomb was, and straightway a great cry was heard from the tomb. And going near, Jesus rolled away the stone from the door of the tomb. And straightway going in where the youth was, he stretched forth his hand and raised him, seizing his hand. But the youth, looking upon him, loved him and began to beseech him that he might be with him. And going out of the tomb, they came into the house of the youth, for he was rich. And after 6 days, Jesus told him what to do. And in the evening, the youth comes to him, wearing a linen cloth over his naked body. And he remained with him that night, for Jesus taught him the mystery of the kingdom of God. And thence, arising, he returned to the other side of the Jordan. And then there's a second excerpt, which is even more brief. And the sister of the youth whom Jesus loved, and his mother and Salome were there, and Jesus did not receive them.
Interesting. Well, Dr. Burke, what exactly is the Secret Gospel of Mark?
Well, the excerpts that you read there are presented by Clement of Alexandria. He's a writer at the turn of the century, from the 2nd to the 3rd century, and he's written this letter to someone named Theodore. And Theodore has written to Clement asking about this longer version of Mark that is current in Alexandria, and he wants to know what is the real content of this gospel, because there appears to be yet another version of this gospel that a group called the Carpocratians is circulating. So he's asking Clement, what are the actual contents of this longer Mark? And Clement is giving him a couple of stories from it that are in this longer Mark, so that he can distinguish it from this other version by the Carpocratians.
Okay. And when I was doing we mentioned this earlier, when I was doing some background research on this, I had recalled many years ago reading some controversy, but the more research that I've done, the more controversy I seem to be uncovering here. What are the main controversies about Secret Mark and its discovery?
Yeah, well, one of the problems with this text is the person who discovered it. This is Morton Smith, a scholar who's now deceased. And in 1958, he was cataloging books and manuscripts in a library in the Marsaba Monastery in just southeast of Jerusalem. And he found this old copy of a book from the 17th century, and in the back of it is written this letter, a copy of this letter. And Smith was a bit of a maverick. He's a bit of an odd personality. And so when he comes out publishing this text that no one has ever heard of before, at first it's largely accepted as being genuine, but over time people have started to look at it and say, well, there's something a bit fishy about this. And one of the things that's fishy about it is what appear to be some homoerotic elements in the text. And when Smith published the text, he did hint that perhaps this suggests that Jesus was a leader of this kind of a mystery cult, and that his followers would go through these initiation ceremonies, and that perhaps there would be some kind of a physical union involved as well. So the text has been always connected with Smith's view of that text as being some kind of homoerotic and homosexual union. But that doesn't mean Smith was correct. So a lot of the people who value this text and see it as perhaps authentic, it really does come from antiquity, have really been trying to separate the text from its interpretation by Smith, and thus encourage people to look at it with fresh eyes.
Now, in your academic opinion, do you believe that it is an ancient text, or do you believe that it is modern forgery?
I believe it is an authentic ancient text of some sort. In the past 10 years or so, the arguments for forgery and authenticity have really heated up, and my involvement in this text was to put on a conference in which we talked about some of the stronger arguments for its authenticity or forgery. And one of the things that came out of it was a paper by a scholar named Alan Pantuck. And Alan researches what's called the Morton Smith Archive, which is all his papers that he left after he died. And it really shows us, by looking at this archive, that Smith worked on this text for quite a number of years, trying to figure out how to translate it appropriately. And so we get all this rough work that Smith did, and that no one was ever supposed to see. So if he created it himself, why would he have to figure out what it actually meant? Because, if you create a text, you make it mean whatever you want it to mean. But he struggled with it. He tried to understand it. And I think that material from the archive really shows that it is an authentic text that Smith found in this monastery. Now, does it really mean that it came from the letter was really written by Clement of Alexandria? Perhaps not. It could have been written by somebody else later on. But the argument that Smith forged it, I think, needs to be, we need to leave that behind, because I really don't see that it's possible that Smith could have done so.
I've often wondered why somebody with his academic reputation would put everything on the line to...
That's often asked as well. But when people talk about Smith, they say he was a brilliant guy, but I'm not sure what the best word to describe him. He's a guy who said he was smart enough to have pulled it off, and is of the personality that would have tried. But when people try to come up with reasons why he would have done it, most of those reasons don't appear to be legitimate. One person has stated that Smith was angry at the Academy for not giving him his due recognition. But when you look back at his life, this was published at a time where he was getting recognition, and he continued to do so through the rest of his career. So it's hard to figure out what the motive would be for Smith, besides just trying to be a bit of a shit disturber. But again, it's one of those theories that just doesn't seem to carry as much weight as it perhaps used to.
Why do you think that these brief fragments really matter to the field of biblical studies or church history today? Do you think that they really add something to the Gospel of Mark, or do you think that they stand on their own, given the fact that, as you've pointed out, that this letter may not have been written by Clement of Alexandria? Do you think, what importance would you give them in the study of the canon?
Well, one of the theories, I believe, originally put forward by an American scholar named Helmut Kester, was that what we have in Secret Mark is not a secondary lengthening of Mark, but actually is the original Mark, and the one that we have in the Bible, canonical Mark, is actually a shortening. And when people come up with those kinds of theories, it really can work to diminish the weight of the biblical text. Because if you start to say canonical Mark is somehow insufficient, because it's a shortening of Mark's original text, it does kind of undercut the biblical message. But, I think for the most part, people who value the Bible, Christians who value the Bible, wouldn't be convinced by those kind of arguments anyway. I'm more interested in it, of course, as a scholar of Christian history and Christian literature, and it's important for people like me to try and understand where these texts came from and the process by which they came to us. and how they were interpreted in different places in time. So, for example, no matter what form Mark originally took, if Clement of Alexandria really did know a longer version of Mark, then it tells us about Clement of Alexandria's church and how they used the text. And so that's important. But I don't think it really has a lot of importance for modern day Christians in that sense.
Now I've got a question for you. You said earlier, one of your first statements was that you're looking at, and many modern scholars are kind of looking at ways to look at this text, but kind of separating it from the way that Morton Smith maybe had interpreted the text.
Right.
That being said, then do you think that Secret Mark proves or gives any overwhelming evidence to some of the theories that maybe Morton Smith had associated with this text? I mean, primarily things that Jesus was gay, that he possibly was a magician or initiate of some initiatory rite, and this is what's taking place in the text. The leader of some particular cult. Any strong evidence one way or the other that you can see?
Let's start with the Jesus is gay question. There are two parts of the text that really people have looked at as being homoerotic, and the one is that we have a youth that loved Jesus, and then this youth comes to Jesus in the night wearing only a linen cloth over his naked body, and he spends the night with Jesus. So that there are a couple of things that to modernize sound somewhat euphemistic, especially the term spend the night with. And so the critics of the text are saying, well, that's not a phrase that people would use in antiquity. As it happens, it is. The phrase is used in the Gospel of Luke when Jesus appears to two of his disciples after the resurrection, and he spends the night with them, teaching them. So it's not an odd phrase for antiquity either. Now, I think the homoeroticism is in the eye of the beholder. If you think that these things look homoerotic, then they are. But the text, I think, can be read without thinking that at all. Let me give you kind of another example of this. If we found, say, a copy of the Gospel of John today, it's been lost to history until today, and we read the story of the Last Supper. And in the Last Supper, we have a character called the beloved disciple. This is the disciple that Jesus loved. And he's reclining against Jesus, reclining on his chest, it says. Now, to modernize, that would seem rather homoerotic, and say the person who found it was a bit of a maverick in the field. You'd think there's no way this could be authentic. But again, with all of these things joined together, he's a strange scholar, gifted but strange. He finds a text that no one has ever heard of before, and it's got these strange elements in it. All those together has led to this suggestion that it presents Jesus as gay. But I think if you read the text very closely, that's not really there. Now, one of the reasons I'm interested in this text, because I'm interested in how scholars have received it, how they have judged it authentic or not authentic. And it's generally very conservative scholars who see the homoeroticism in it, and therefore they want to dispense with it very, very quickly. Saying this cannot possibly be Jesus. Jesus would not be like this. It must be a forgery. And then they try to prove it's a forgery. But if they looked at it without thinking it shows Jesus that way, maybe they would be less anxious to dispense with it as a forgery. And the similar thing is going on with the text, the Gospel of Jesus' wife. Now, that too may be a forgery, but people jumped on it very, very quickly, saying it cannot possibly be authentic because Jesus was not married. We need to, take more time with these things and really investigate them as scholars and not just let our emotions guide us. But that's when it comes to the question of the homoeroticism of the text, whether it presents Jesus as gay, which I don't think it does. But does it present him as a magician? That's, again, we need to be careful of separating the text that Smith found from Smith's own scholarship about Jesus. And he did think that Jesus was a magician who's the leader of a mystery cult. Interesting enough, though, when Smith wrote his book called Jesus the Magician, it was after he found Secret Mark, and he did not use Secret Mark in his argument. I think because he didn't want to anchor his argument on a text that was still brand new to scholarship, and it's a smart move. But as critics say, he did that because he didn't think his text was real. So you can't have it both ways. But was Jesus then a magician? Well, Jesus seems to have been a miracle worker, if you believe the text. And in antiquity, if you like someone and they do special things, you call them a miracle worker. If you don't like someone and they do special things, you call them a magician. It's a pejorative term. So Jesus, by all accounts, people think he did magical, supernatural things, but whether you're a supporter or not a supporter of him is how you is the term that you apply to him. He's a miracle worker because we like him. He's a magician, we don't like him, but it's all the same kind of thing. When it comes to mystery cults, I think mystery cults come a little bit later than Jesus' time. It's much more of a Greco-Roman form of religiosity, not so much a Palestinian Galilean form. So certainly later on, Christians started to articulate Christianity using the tropes of Greco-Roman mystery cults. But was Jesus that type of a figure? I don't really think that is the case. I don't want to stretch my answer out too long, but one other thing I would add, if you read the Gospel of Mark, as we have it in the canon, Jesus is a pretty mysterious figure in that text too. Mm-hmm. You know, he speaks to the apostles in parables that they don't quite understand, and then he has to take them aside and explain them to them, which has that sense of secrecy and mystery about it. And then the apostles still don't get what they mean anyway. They're not very bright. So I think what it boils down to is, yes, probably historically, Jesus had an inner circle of followers that he taught special teachings that maybe he didn't teach to everybody else. But magician, no. Mystery cult, no, I wouldn't go there either.
Okay, that's absolutely fascinating, and I want to thank you for touching on those topics, particularly since a lot of our viewers, I think, are really interested in this, and I'm looking forward to going deeper into this in the After Dark podcast. For our viewers, that After Dark podcast should be up sometime around Sunday night or Monday, and you can check that out at the Gnostic Wisdom Network website, also on our Facebook group, or on iTunes or Stitcher. Dr. Burke, where can people find you online?
I do have a Twitter account that I use fairly regularly. You probably search it just using my name, but the actual Twitter name is @TB Apoc, APOC. And I also have a blog called Apocryphicity, which you can just search for. Then I also have my own website, which is tonyburke.ca, which is just for pedagogical materials like course syllabi and so on for my students, though there's a few other things on there as well. Apocryphicity, the blog, focuses on apocryphal texts in general. Mm-hmm. So I deal with Secret Mark when it comes up, but a full range of other apocryphal Christian texts and Gnostic apocryphal Christian texts as well. I try to post things fairly regularly, but it does take a lot of time, and there's so many other things to do.
It's a great blog. I was telling Father Tony and Bishop Ken earlier today that your blog is a regular rabbit hole. I spent a lot of time doing a lot of research on there. It's also wonderfully well tagged and organized. So if you're interested in a particular topic, folks, he's got a great table of contents, and you can easily find posts on the topics that you're interested in. So I do strongly recommend that you visit this blog. Now, I do have an audience question. How does Secret Mark change your view of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, or does it change it at all? Please let us know in the comments section or over on our Facebook page. We've also got a few bits of news. The Urania Trust is doing some fundraising for the Master of Arts program in Myth, Cosmology, and the Sacred at Canterbury Christ Church University in Kent. I bring this up because this is an exciting time in scholarship and in academia where we're finally beginning to see topics like Gnosticism, like Western esotericism, divination, myth, they're coming into their own as areas of academic study. And this program at Canterbury Christ Church University just sounds absolutely fascinating, but they are looking for financial support so they can give scholarships to students. So if you're at all interested in helping to support students who want to be studying these issues, you can go to www.uraniatrust.org/sponsor-an ma-student.html, and you can learn more about how you can support this great program. I also want to mention that the Joanite Church will be having its annual conclave May 21st through the 26th in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. You do not have to be a Joanite to attend conclave. There are going to be some fascinating presentations as well as opportunity for fellowship with other Gnostics and the ability to attend some great masses and prayer services. And you can participate as much or as little as you choose. If that is of interest to you, you can go to www.joanite.org/conclave 2015 / So if you are interested in getting to know some other Gnostics and see how one modern Gnostic church operates, head on out to conclave. I'm sure you're going to have a great time. Finally, coming up on Talk Gnosis, next week, Timothy Freak will be joining us to discuss Gnosticism and the mystery experience. So that's going to be, I think, an awesome show as well. So I want to thank you, Dr. Burke, for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Yes, and you, Bishop Canterbury. And we're going to move on to After Dark now, but thank you all for watching. Take care of yourself. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
This has been a production of the Gnostic Wisdom Network. For more information about this and all of GWN's programming, please visit gnosticwisdom.net. The opinions expressed in this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of GWN, the Apostolic Joanite Church, or any other organization. This has been released under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 International License and is brought to you by the generous support of our patrons. To support our programs and become a patron, please visit patreon.com/Gnostic. That's patreon.com/GNOSTIC.